going, we don't need roads.
Beautiful. So the first question is kind of a big overview question, but as sort of the creative mind behind this show, I'm curious as to what's more difficult, the beginning or the end? Coming up with the show and getting it off the ground, or deciding when it's time to say goodbye and walk away?
That's a tough question. I think it's kind of equal parts. I will say, like, starting a show is the hardest part of the job for sure. Obviously, because you're kind of laying groundwork for what's to come, and so much of the future of the show is dependent on the kind of work that you do off the top. I think in our case, I was just so pleased with with the direction of the show that it really kind of spoke to me in a way that didn't require a lot of thought near the end. Like, we just inevitably knew that we were, building towards an inevitable conclusion, which a lot of shows don't get the freedom to do. So I think it was around season 3 that we decided to end at 6. So really, from halfway through our series, I kind of was consciously building toward a conclusion. And, I think when you have that kind of luxury, it makes the back end a little bit easier, because you're not sort of constantly wondering, am I going to get picked up? Am I not? Are they going to cancel my show? So it led to a really thoughtful conclusion that we, that again was very stressful, but one that I'm very proud of.
And it felt so natural. And to your point, yeah, it didn't just feel like, oh, like story's done. It kind of felt like, oh, like it makes sense that this is where we're going. I know at the beginning, sort of the show evolved from this idea of what if a family like the Kardashians just lost everything? Like, how would they handle it? I'm sort of curious, what was it about that idea that originally fascinated you? And was it actually the Kardashians that you had in mind when you were sort of picturing this sort of family?
No, it was not. I just think that around the time that we were developing the show, reality culture had been bigger than it ever had before. You have Real Housewives, you have Kardashians, you have, I guess it sort of started with the Osbournes, where, even 20 years ago, the only access that people had to the wealthy lifestyles of the rich and famous was, in fact, lifestyles of the rich and famous, where you'd get like a very kind of glamorous house tour. But it was only in I think the past decade that we were given access to the lives of incredibly wealthy people in a way that was far more intimate than we'd ever, had access to before. So to play on this collective awareness now of how wealthy people lived, I thought it would be an interesting exploration of what happens to one of these families that we've come to know so well if the wealth was taken away. How would they operate? How would they express love to one another? And the rest of the show kind of fell into place once we started to play around with that concept.
For sure. And, I know whenever you were pitching the original idea to all the networks, you kind of crafted this 14-minute pilot. You didn't have a lot of money whenever you were putting it together. I'm sort of curious, What's the biggest difference between like the roses in that original 14-minute pilot versus the roses that we ended up getting?
It's night and day,
Is it?
It's yeah. I mean, one was kind of it was like the origin story to what actually became our show. So, I think the development of the characters was really kind of preliminary, and I actually don't know where that little presentation pilot is, but I would be
You
very
have to find that.
But I knew even in that presentation that we had the kind of makings of something special. We just needed a little bit of cash thrown our way to expand that world.
I feel like oftentimes with comedy series, especially, you look at The Office or you look at Seinfeld, sometimes it takes a couple of episodes or sometimes even that first season to kind of hit your stride and get out of the growing pains of and just kind of realize what sort of show you wanted to be. When did you sort of feel like Schitt's Creek kind of settled in and sort of formed the kind of show that you wanted it really to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing about our show was that we had a lot of groundwork to lay before we could start to introduce some of the more sentimental layers into our characters. We really had to slowly but surely show in our first season who these characters were in order to thoughtfully build them into who they're going to become. So for us, our first season really is a foundational layer and an entry point into the show so that with that reference of, of the before, we could then earn those emotional moments as we start to crack these characters open and reveal the after. So, I think probably the big emotional turning point was at the end of season 2. I think for the first 2 seasons of our show, we were really kind of building that, and it was a very different tone, and it was a very different sort of, almost in a way, it was a slightly different comedy because it was kind of harder than it became. But that was all kind of a conscious step towards, if we were lucky enough, the revelations that love, cannot be bought. So for us, we were really lucky that we had the time to lay that groundwork, and that our audiences really stuck along for the ride, because I think if you commit, it's a really worthwhile experience.
Those first "I love yous," man, were just
I know
I was.
It's a funny thing in the writers' room. We were sort of talking about what would be the big emotional moment for this family, and it's like the fact that they said "I love you" for the first time, which I think in a lot of family dynamics is a pretty common thing to say. But it packed a very emotional punch in this case, because the 4 Roses had rarely, if never, said it to each other.
For sure. And it hit me in the feels, as they say. The show has had, I've covered entertainment for a long time, and I've never seen such a unique journey for a television show, because this is a show that just kept growing and growing and never looked back. And a lot of times, a lot of shows tend to fizzle out by the end. I mean, and this show is over, right, and it's still growing and people are still discovering it. What was the first moment in your journey of the 6 years of this show where you paused and went like, oh, this is taking off? Like, people are really starting to notice this.
I mean, I think it was probably when Carol Burnett mentioned the show on, I believe it was The Tonight Show. And that, I think, was the first time that any of us, A, knew that anybody was watching, and B, thought to ourselves, okay, if we're doing something that's impressing Carol Burnett, then maybe we're onto something special here. But we had the luxury, again, of being a very slow burn and having networks that supported us, even when people weren't necessarily watching in droves, which I think is a message to TV networks out there that, let this be an example that if you give a television show room to grow, pretty amazing things can happen.
It's the sort of thing that you hear about happened, because I remember like the first season of Seinfeld didn't do well, and they said, no, we're going to keep it going. We're going to let it play. I feel like you don't hear those sort of stories anymore, because you have to sort of be a hit right off the first episode or you get canceled.
Exactly. Well, it's now like the business has sort of overrode the artful side of television. So when you get the opportunity to work with networks or streaming services that really support your idea in the long term, that is kind of an opportunity that you should run with.
Absolutely. These characters, we've talked sort of about the evolution of these characters, and I'm just sort of curious, over 6 seasons, 6 years, these characters have changed so much and we kind of grow with them. How much did you know early on about the directions that you wanted to take, specifically the 4 Roses, and what was the character evolution at the end of the show that ended up surprising you the most?
Well, I think, from day one, we knew that this show was going to be an exploration of like self-reflection and the positive effects of understanding what love really means and what its value really is, and that it is something that cannot be bought. So I think with that philosophy, we knew that our characters were going to go through an emotional journey where in the end they were going to understand things about themselves and each other that they never knew before, and that their experiences and their relationships with not just themselves and each other, but with this town that they had originally thought was a huge hindrance in their life, that love and support and acceptance in a community setting can really bring out the best in people. So with that, we really kind of sat down with each of our characters and said, okay, what do they need to know about themselves that they don't know yet? And we really took that conversation and ran with it for each of our characters. And I think by the end of the series, you really do get to see those journeys of sort of self-discovery and self-reflection play out in really meaningful ways for them. And I think that's a testament to our I guess, to our now Emmy-winning cast. It's a strange thing to say still.
You get to say it forever.
But it's true. I think we had the great fortune of having unbelievable actors embody these parts. And, you know, it's a very hard thing to play comedy. It's much harder to make someone laugh than it is to make someone cry. And to have a cast that could, at the drop of a hat, make someone laugh and then cry in a split second, it's a skill, and it's a very hard thing to do. And so, you know, that I really think so much of that lies in the hands of our cast and what they were able to do with these characters and how they were able to breathe life into them in ways that even our writing team couldn't sort of access. So it really was a team effort, and it's been amazing to look back on.
It's such a wide range of emotions. I found myself like, just usually weeping on an episode by episode basis, and then not knowing like, are these sad tears? Are they happy tears? I don't even know what kind of tears are falling, but they are. But aside from the roses, the secondary characters, I feel like that's such a bad word, but the secondary characters on the show, they're so brilliantly written and perfectly formed and obviously geniusly acted, and obviously maybe they don't get as much screen time as the Four Roses, but they seem just like, not like you spent all the time on the four and kind of got around to this, like, you seem like you spent just as much time. Who was your favorite secondary character to write?
Oh goodness, I mean, that's a tough one, because I do see the show so much as an ensemble, and yes, it is sort of centered around this family. But I do think that when I think of the show, I think of it as being a community. I think of, the entire town, alongside the Roses being like moving through the journey together. I loved writing some of Jocelyn's one-liners. I loved writing some of Ronnie's sort of clapbacks at Alexis. That dynamic was really fun to play. I think, any character that kind of goes against the Roses was a fun relationship and a fun scene to write. And so, a lot of those Jazzigal scenes, the dynamic of like a Jocelyn, Ronnie, Moira, Jocelyn would cave a little more to Moira, Ronnie wouldn't, playing with that dynamic. I think the Alexis, Patrick, David trifecta, the Stevie, David, Patrick trifecta. We were fortunate enough to really be able to kind of, mix everybody up and play with them all in really fun and new ways as the seasons carried on. So again, it's like when you've got a really strong cast, it makes it easy to write for those characters.
And the writing is obviously so sharp. And I was telling you that, if you can't tell, I'm a big crybaby. Ever since I turned 30, I just start crying at everything. But really, the show, it hit me in a lot of ways. And obviously, for a lot of people watching the show, it's a very emotional experience. I'm sort of curious for you, what was the most emotional scene to film? And, were any of the tears that were ever shed, like actual, just real tears, you just happen to be crying?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard. I'm an emotional person, in case anyone couldn't tell already. But I think when you put everything you have, your time, your energy, your strength, your efforts into something, and then have it succeed in the way that our show did, I mean, there is an emotional attachment to not just the experience, but to the people that you work with, to the cast that you're working with. It becomes a family unit. And I think for all of us to have gone through this experience together, to have grown together, to have succeeded together, to then say goodbye to those people, you're saying goodbye to your family. And so for a lot of us, it was an incredibly, I think, the documentary that happened after the last episode of our show really kind of showed how an emotional a journey that was, because you really get into the habit of knowing that every year you're going to come back to something that you really love. You're going to come back to a team of people that you really enjoy collaborating with. So to know that there was kind of like an end date to that, and then to suddenly be on that last day, it was an incredibly kind of emotional and overwhelming experience. But the great thing about, I think, our team is that we all kind of know that the experience has kind of bound us together in a way that we will always have each other in our lives, and some kind of will only be an arm's length away from each other. So that, as the dust settled and the tears stopped, we do have the sort of, knowledge that there is comfort in knowing that we'll always sort of be around each other in some way.
I don't know if you've gone back to watch the clips, but the only thing I loved more than watching all of you win the Emmys is watching the rest of you in the background. So happy when Annie won, watching you in the background, just like that. That was the best.
I was happier for Annie than I was for myself. And I think, you know, again, we were isolated in a tent outside in Toronto. We had our team around us. It really did feel in a way like just a dinner party among friends. And then suddenly you're kind of jolted into the realization that you're being broadcast around the world. But that night was, for me, obviously the greatest night of my professional and personal life. And I was so overwhelmed with pride. And I think at the end of the day, you know, you're constantly combating, like, should I curb my feelings so that I don't look, you know, overly enthusiastic? But I mean, for me, it's like, who knows when that experience is going to happen again? And I'm going to feel everything I can possibly feel on that night, because you might only get it once. So yeah, we had a really good time.
And you earned that good time. And I'm glad that you didn't hold back your emotions, because obviously, because for me, it was the best part of the show. You know, I read in an interview with you a while back where you said growing up, there wasn't a character like David. There wasn't a character that you could look at and identify with. And I'm just sort of curious that what it means to you to have now provided that character for future generations to see and relate to and look up to.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, if you get an opportunity to tell stories that reflect your life and your community, you gotta just run with it, and you gotta be as honest about it and as truthful about it as you possibly can. I think for me, it was just, I felt a level of responsibility knowing that I had freedom to tell stories and freedom to show a love story that I never really got to see growing up. So for me, that was really about making sure that the intimacy of that relationship felt true, that the moments, those tender moments, those awkward moments, those truthful moments, all rang true to my own experience and the experience of my friends and those in the community. Because who knows, you know, how many people get that kind of opportunity. So if I'm going to go for it, I should do it in as truthful and as meaningful a way as I possibly could. And I think to that point, making the decision to not show homophobia or bigotry on the show was, in my own way, kind of the only time I think the show got political. And I just wasn't going to give power to the other side. If I was going to take this opportunity and I was going to show this relationship grow, I wanted this relationship to grow in a healthy, supportive, encouraging environment, so that potentially we can kind of show an example of what life could be like if people were more supportive and accepting of each other. Just how successful people can become, how happy people can become, and not just the people experiencing it, but the community as a whole who gets to be a part of someone's growth.
One of my favorite moments of the entire series is actually early in season 1. I think it's at Ronnie's at the Hawaiian party, where this character who you think is potentially going to say something maybe homophobic or say, you know, tells Johnny, like, let your kids love who they love. Yeah. And I love that, because based on who that kind of character is, you think maybe he's going to say something offensive and like it's going to be made for the butt of a joke. And when he said that, yeah, I remember out loud going, yes, I love seeing a character like that say that. I thought that was fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I think small towns have often gotten written off in movies and TV as being sort of closed-minded or the butt of a joke. And it was really important for us to show the strength of small town life, show the sense of community of small town life, and to show this town as a beacon of progressive thought, and let the joke be the family. You know, let the joke be the family learning that they have a lot to learn from this town. Mm-hmm. So, you know, in making the choice to never have this small town be, you know, the butt of the joke or reduced to caricature, it really was important for us that we show through these townspeople just how loving and supportive that they are, and defy expectations and push back on this preconceived notion of what we project onto certain people the beliefs that we project onto certain people or the expectations that we have of people, and really challenge the concept of perception in a way that hopefully will inspire people to just, I guess, be better.
For sure. Well, I got a handful more questions I'm going to try to run through if you don't mind, and then I'll cut you loose because I don't want to take up your whole morning. But, I love how much this show has ingrained itself in pop culture. Like, I feel like I can't say the word baby the right way anymore. I have a friend named David who, like, before he even saw the show, often hears, like, ew, David. And he was like, why do people keep saying that to me? I had a friend who sent me a picture in a like a cooking thing that said like fold the cheese. Like it's there whether you even realize it's from the show or not. What's the most interesting way that you see that this show has sort of ingrained itself into pop culture?
Other than the fact that people just say "ooh" to me on the street, which was an unexpected, confusing surprise, I suppose. Sometimes I forget that they're referencing the show, and I just keep thinking, like, do I have something on my face? I don't know what's going on. I think we had an incredible, an incredible voice behind our social media. Callum did such an incredible job engaging a community over Twitter and Instagram, and I think part of that was on him, just making sure that those memes and those GIFs or GIFs or whatever you call them, got out there, and that the little sort of like, graphics that you can put on Instagram photo, all of that, I think sort of led to this, led to the fact that people are sending me conversations now over text message that are just in Schitt's Creek, like GIFs. It's wild. You never really kind of expect to have an impact like that, and I don't know whether to apologize or to be grateful for it, but it is what it is, I guess.
Yeah, it comes with it. After the State Farm commercials came out, every person came up to me, they're like, "Hey, Jake, are you wearing khakis?" I'm like, you gotta let it go. So I get it. It's part of that. Speaking of text messaging, is there a Schitt's Creek group text thread?
There are several, yeah. They're obviously like little, I don't think we have a big one, but we certainly have like little 3-person groups happening all over the place. And, we're all friends. I know that's like a kind of strange thing to say and for people to actually believe, but we're all really close. And, I was just, chatting with Annie the other day, who's working on her new show. And, we were talking about just like getting her ready for that show. And I couldn't be more happy for everybody, for their successes, for the fact that this job has helped to kind of get more jobs that, our entire cast seems to be employed. And as much as I would love to just have kept working with them forever and ever, I'm just thrilled that that the show has played a small part in their growth as actors as well.
Speaking of keep working with them, obviously, if you had kept going to season 16, we probably would have all been there for it. But I'm just sort of curious.
I don't know about that.
Come on.
That's why we ended when we ended.
That's fair.
My biggest fear is being one of those shows that people are like, it's good until season 7 and then it dropped off. You got to get out while you're ahead if you can.
That's fair. It's the Breaking Bad theory, and now I think people will call the Schitt's Creek theory. But I'm curious. Have you thought about where this family will be in 5 years or 10 years, and would there ever be consideration to maybe bringing people back for like a special or a reunion or a movie?
Listen, I would love to work with them again. I think as a group, we would love to work together again. It just has to be the right idea. And, I feel so proud of the note that we left the show on, that the idea just has to be strong enough to bring everybody back and to say, we've gotten more story to tell. I hope that day comes. I hope that I kind of jump out of bed in the middle of the night having figured it out. But until that happens, we're just going to let the dust settle on the show for a bit.
Fair enough.
And just hope that I get that that idea.
We're all hoping for it. I can't imagine how tough the goodbye process was for all of you, but I was thinking about you recently in that because you are the creator of the show and you're a writer on the show and a director on the show and was your goodbye process just elongated into an unbearable sort of like, because you had to say, like, it was always the last time you were doing something.
Yeah. I mean, when we wrapped shooting it, we had to say goodbye to the cast and crew. When we wrapped editing it, we had to say goodbye to the editors. When we wrapped sound, we had to say goodbye to the sound team. When we wrapped press, we had to say goodbye to everybody involved in that. It just was, I mean, it's been nice because it keeps kind of, there's always like that dangling carrot for me so that I know that it's not done. But yeah, it was excruciating. And it got to a point while we were shooting where, you know, an AD would suddenly call out, well, that's the last time we will be picking up a plate in the cafe. And I finally had to say, okay, if we do this for every last time, I mean, there's just going to be tears every day. So let's figure out what we want to do. Let's, you know, be a little more selective about the announcements on the last thing that we're doing, just for everybody's, you know, emotional well-being.
What was the last scene that you filmed as David?
It was the goodbye. It was the very last scene of, it was my last scene in the show, which I think obviously made shooting it all the more emotional. And I think for me, when I was watching, I obviously did my research and I went back through television shows whose finales that I really loved. And kind of the magic for me about the last season of a series is looking really closely at the actors in those last few moments and in those last few scenes and trying to find the actor in the character and seeing how the actors are relating to each other. I mean, you know, I think the Friends finale is one of those kind of iconic moments. They shot it on they shot it in front of a studio audience. Their whole lives changed together. And when you go back and watch it, you can really see that the thin line between character and actor was really kind of present there. And I do feel in that last scene where we're saying goodbye, you know, you don't have to look too closely to know that David and Alexis and Stevie and Patrick were very much just Dan and Annie and Emily and Noah.
I'm getting emotional just thinking about it, man. All right. One last question to cut loose because I don't want to start crying at the end of the interview. You know, I know that the show obviously hasn't been over that long, so you really haven't had a massive amount of time to be able to like sort of reflect back and look back on it. But have you started thinking about sort of the show's legacy and what it means to you and what it means to everyone? Have you started looking at it in terms of like a bigger picture of its place in history?
No, I don't think you can. I mean, we really just set out to make a show that meant something to us, that we thought was funny and sweet. And I mean, I will say that the letters we get from fans who have really kind of embraced the show in really meaningful ways, the letters from fans who, you know, were telling us that the conversations even within their homes have changed about sexuality, that their relationships to friends and family have changed for the better, that people have come out of the closet because they've felt emboldened by the show. That has been the great takeaway, and that I hope will be the legacy of the show, that it's inspired people to do better in their lives and to be better people and to be more accepting and more loving. And, you know, if we can play a small sort of part in that big concept, then, you know, we've done something right.
Well, you've done a lot of things right. If you can't tell, man, I'm such a fan of yours. I'm a fan of everyone. I'm a fan of the show. And I posted yesterday that I was going to get to do this interview, and I've gotten more reaction from people, to your point, than just about anyone that I have done, I think, in my entire career. So from the bottom of my heart, on behalf of all of us, man, I seriously just thank you. Thank you for this show, and thank you for all the happiness you brought to the world, man. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for watching, and thank you for letting me have my dog sleep in the background of our.
Next time, whenever my dog finds out that your dog got to be a part of this and mine didn't, she's going to be very upset. So next time we do this, we'll have to have both of our dogs be a part of it. Dan, really such a pleasure, man. If you ever come to Chicago, please let us know. You know, I'd love to, you know, it's dinner on me and the girlfriend, man. We'd love to have you.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you.
All right, take care, man.
I'll hold you to it.
All right, bye-bye.
Where we're going, we don't need Rose.